In the 16th century, a Muslim empire nearly erased a Christian kingdom that Europe believed untouchable. Its armies burned royal capitals, shattered ancient churches, and redrew the map of the Horn of Africa. Then, almost as quickly, it vanished from mainstream memory, not destroyed, not disproven, just minimized, archived into footnotes. Why does the Ethiopian Highland Chronicle describe a war of survival, yet barely name the force that nearly ended it? Why do Portuguese letters speak in panic about a conqueror of Abyssinia, while modern textbooks give him a paragraph? And who decided that this empire's story would be reduced to a shadow? Tonight, the file opens on the Adal Sultanate. The setting is the Horn of Africa in the early 1500s, a fractured world of highland Christian emperors and lowland Muslim sultanates, trade routes threading the Red Sea, Ottoman cannons echoing across distant coasts, a frontier where religion, commerce, and survival intertwine. For centuries, the Christian Ethiopian Empire and neighboring Muslim states fought, negotiated, and traded in cycles. Border raids were common, alliances shifted. Faith was political currency. But by the 1520s, something changes. The chronicles tighten, the tone sharpens. A name appears with increasing frequency in Ethiopian records: Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, known to Ethiopian sources as Ahmad Gran, the left-handed. Was he merely a raider, or was he building something far larger? Adal was not a desert mirage. It was a functioning sultanate, centered in the lowlands of present-day eastern Ethiopia and Somalia, with trade connections stretching toward the Arabian Peninsula. Harar thrived as a cultural and religious hub. Mosques rose where caravan routes converged. The Sultanate drew scholars, merchants, and warriors. Yet to understand the scale of what followed, you have to imagine the imbalance of memory. The Ethiopian Empire preserved its chronicles in monasteries carved into rock. Its survival became a European fascination. Adal's records were thinner, dispersed, some lost to time and war. When one side writes in abundance and the other in fragments, whose story survives? By 1529, Ahmad al-Ghazi launches a campaign that will shake the highlands. Ethiopian sources describe waves of disciplined troops, bolstered by firearms, matchlock muskets likely acquired through Ottoman channels. Portuguese observers later confirm the shock. Gunpowder changes the rhythm of war. Monastic libraries burn. Royal regalia is seized. Emperor Lebna Dengel retreats repeatedly. How does a frontier sultanate push back an ancient Christian monarchy? The answer lies in strategy and momentum. Ahmad consolidates rival Muslim factions under a unified banner. Records suggest he frames the campaign in religious terms, but also in political ones: control of trade routes, fertile land, and legitimacy. His forces move with startling coordination. Battles at Shimbra Kure and beyond destabilize imperial defenses. Churches fall. Highland fortresses crumble. Ethiopian chronicles speak of devastation. They do not deny the scale, but they often describe the invaders as chaos itself, not as a state. Was that deliberate framing, to cast the enemy as destruction rather than governance? Portuguese sources complicate the picture. In 1541, a small contingent led by Cristóvão da Gama arrives to aid the Ethiopian emperor. Their letters describe Ahmad not as a barbarian, but as a formidable commander. They note artillery, organization, intelligence networks. They fear him. If Adal were merely a peripheral power, why would Portugal intervene so urgently? The war becomes international. Ottoman influence looms from the Red Sea. Portuguese musketeers clash with Adal's forces. At one point, da Gama is captured and executed. His death ripples through European accounts. The campaign grows personal. Yet here's the tension. Ethiopian sources emphasize divine testing and ultimate triumph. Portuguese records highlight Christian solidarity. Adal's internal perspective survives primarily through the Futa al-Habasha, a chronicle written by Shihab al-Din Ahmad. It portrays Ahmad al-Ghazi as a reformer and champion, a man seeking to purify and unify. Three narratives, three lenses, which one becomes dominant in global memory. By 1543, at the Battle of Wayna, Ahmad al-Ghazi is killed. Ethiopian and Portuguese forces claim victory. The immediate threat recedes. The highlands stabilize, but the land is scarred. Decades of warfare have fractured populations, weakened defenses, and altered power balances. And then comes the Oromo migrations, reshaping the region further. In the chaos that follows, Adal's centralized momentum dissolves. Internal divisions surface. Trade patterns shift. Ottoman priorities pivot. The Sultanate fragments. Is that collapse why the memory shrank, or was the shrinking itself political? European historiography, shaped by missionary narratives and imperial interests, often centered Ethiopia as a rare Christian kingdom in Africa. It fit a storyline. A besieged Christian empire resisting Islamic expansion. That frame left little room to treat Adal as an equal civilization with administrative depth and intellectual life. Historians debate whether this was intentional minimization or simply archival imbalance, but the effect is measurable. Ask the average student about 16th century African powers and Ethiopia surfaces. Ask about Adal and silence often follows. Yet archaeological traces persist. Mosques, urban layouts in Harar, manuscripts in Arabic, trade ceramics linking the Horn to the broader Indian Ocean world. The evidence points not to a fleeting insurgency, but to a structured state. So why did Adal's story compress into a footnote? Part of the answer lies in who controlled post-war narrative production. Ethiopian monastic scribes survived and continued writing. Portuguese chroniclers returned to Europe and published accounts. Adal, destabilized and later overshadowed by new political entities, lacked the same sustained textual machinery. Another layer is modern nationalism. 20th century Ethiopian identity often leaned on imperial continuity. Highlighting a near defeat by a Muslim sultanate complicated that arc. Emphasizing resilience made sense. Dwelling on vulnerability less so. But vulnerability does not negate strength. It reveals it. Around 70% into this file, the assumption flips. The minimized story is not just about defeat or disappearance. It's about impact. Even in collapse, Adal permanently altered the Horn's trajectory. Firearms normalized. Demographic shifts accelerated. Religious boundaries hardened. Without Adal's campaigns, would the Ethiopian Empire have militarized differently? Would Portuguese involvement in the region have unfolded the same way? Would Ottoman ambitions have reached so deeply? The war was not a side note. It was a pivot. Consider the future al-Habasha again. It does not read like the record of a minor rebel. It reads like the chronicle of a state confident in its mission. Administrative decisions, diplomatic overtures, internal debates. This was governance in motion. Some scholars caution against romanticizing Ahmad al-Ghazi. His campaigns were brutal. Cultural destruction was real. Ethiopian sources detail burned churches and displaced communities. These are not exaggerations to be dismissed. They are scars in the record. But acknowledging brutality does not erase statecraft. Empires across continents expanded violently. Many still dominate history books. Why is Adal remembered primarily for destruction rather than for its political architecture? Is minimization a byproduct of who ultimately held the pen? As archives reopen and interdisciplinary research grows, a fuller picture emerges. Trade data, linguistic studies, comparative military analysis. Each piece suggests that Adal was not an anomaly. It was a regional power shaped by its environment and era. The climax of this file is not the battlefield where Ahmad falls. It is the realization that memory itself can be selective warfare. When one narrative triumphs, another recedes, not always because it lacked significance, but because it lacked continuity of documentation. The most likely explanation, the verdict, is layered. The Ethiopian Adal Empire was minimized not because it was insignificant, but because it lost the war of archives. Its central figure died. Its state fragmented. Its chroniclers did not enjoy the same institutional longevity. Meanwhile, its adversaries preserved their version with relentless discipline. The evidence does not support conspiracy. It supports imbalance. Structural, archival, political imbalance. What remains are three quiet truths. Power in history is not only about conquest, but about preservation. The side that survives writes with endurance. Second, conflict in the Horn of Africa was never a simple binary of civilization versus chaos. It was a clash of states, strategies, and visions. Third, recovering minimized histories requires reading against the grain, listening to fragments, and letting them speak. Adal was real. Its armies were organized. Its diplomacy mattered. Its impact reshaped a region. The silence around it was not proof of weakness. It was proof of how fragile memory can be. And somewhere in the stone streets of Harar, beneath layers of dust and prayer, the echoes of that empire still wait for the next file to be opened.